All right, everybody, welcome in. This is Benjamin Parker once again with Sports and Money. I haven't been on here in over a year on the YouTube, so I'm excited about getting back on. I miss a lot of you, and hopefully I know y'all have had lots of other good content in other places, so we'll do a quick video tonight on Chris Jones and the Chiefs. I didn't quit, putting out content. I've been on 2 podcasts. I'm going to tell you about those at the end of this video, but I've been on 2 different podcasts and enjoying that too. And so anyway, here we are tonight with another YouTube video, and I'll try to start putting out some more of these as the NFL season progresses. There's never any shortage of things to talk about in terms of the NFL. Tonight, I already mentioned that I am going to cover Chris Jones and the Kansas City Chiefs' current contract kind of stalemate. I debated whether to even put this out because knowing the nature of these contract negotiations, they could work this thing out by midnight tonight. And, my video wouldn't even be out before most of y'all saw it, so I debated even if you put it out there or not. But I thought, since it does look like that might be a few more days before they get this put together, since the season doesn't even start for like another week and a half here, that it would be a great time to go ahead and jump in and talk about it. One of the things I've covered very often is the Kansas City Chiefs and the money side of it. So, most of you already know Chris Jones is currently holding out. If I remember right, he's got 1 year left on his contract. Which was a good paying contract, one I think that he was pretty happy with when he got it, and probably still largely happy with. But now that he's only got 1 year left and he is 29 years old, he's wanting to get back up into another large contract so that he can kind of finish out his career here with another good layer of financial success, which, by the way, is a move that I applaud. Anytime a player wants to try to get more money, I encourage them to do it. Careers of any kind in sports are short-lived. If you're an athlete, you can continue a long time in coaching or in the front office or in TV. As far as your playing career goes and the kinds of money you can get for that, for most of these players, it's a pretty limited time. You really only get 1 or 2 big contracts. And so I encourage any player, anytime, if you think you can get more money, go for it. And then, whatever it settles into, whatever you negotiate out, live with it, be happy, move on. And I think that's the best approach. So I'm all in favor of Chris Jones doing this. And in fact, I really feel like Kansas City should have expected this. And they probably did. Maybe they weren't sure if Chris Jones would push this hard. But I think that Kansas City should have expected this, because if you're Chris Jones, you really don't want to step on the field again at the age of 29 and it be the last year of your deal. If you get injured, your money goes way down and probably never comes back up again, because next season you would be 30 years old. You would be coming off some kind of an injury. No matter how severe, it would still be some kind of an injury, and you just wouldn't have had your best tape out there. And so I think Kansas City should have expected this. They probably did to an extent, and it's no surprise that Chris Jones is doing this, and in fact, I encourage him to do it. The consensus seems to be, and the majority opinion, one that I'm fine with, by the way, is that, well, the whole defense has been built around Chris Jones, and he's the best player on the defense, and without him, they're probably not going to win a Super Bowl this year. Excuse me, and therefore they should just go ahead and pay him. That there's just really no question about it. Go ahead and pay the guy and move on. And that's the majority opinion, and it's not a wrong opinion, by the way. The Chiefs have worked very hard to get to this point, bringing in Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, putting together that offensive line, and building that defense to a degree. Again, it's not a top 10 defense most years, and in fact, hardly any years, but still, good, solid defense that supports that offense. And so they've done a lot to get here, and there's nothing wrong with anybody thinking that because Chris Jones is so good, and because the Chiefs probably won't win a Super Bowl this year without him on defense, that they should just go ahead and pay him. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of thinking. And as a matter of fact, that's kind of what I expect the Chiefs to do. I really would be surprised if they move on from Chris Jones at this point. I'm going to lay out a case for moving on from Chris Jones here, because I don't mind laying out the minority report here. But the majority opinion is one that I'm totally fine with. If the Chiefs decide that they do want to get on board with Chris Jones again for whatever he's asking for, and go ahead and pay him, and just handle that moving forward, there's nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, most people expect that, and I expect them to work something out here. I really don't think that they are trying to move on. I do, however, think that they are keeping all their options on the table, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Matter of fact, if you're a general manager of any team anywhere, any company anywhere, you should always be keeping all of your options on the table. You should never get into tunnel vision or thinking that there's only one outcome that can happen, or you should never get too locked in. It's no different than a quarterback that gets locked in on his favorite receiver too often. That's a bad habit. And as a general manager of any place, anywhere, you should always be looking to keep your options open, because there are other ways to do things, and very rarely is there only one right way to do things. So again, before I get too deep in here, I want to be clear. If the Chiefs were tonight to hand over, let's say, Aaron Donald kind of money for 4 seasons to Chris Jones, that wouldn't surprise me, and I'd be okay with it. It's not probably the move I would like to be making. I don't think it's the move they want to make. But I'm okay with that. That's totally fine. So here's the flip side, though. Number one is Chris Jones is 29 years old. We have seen over the past, I think, 4 seasons that the Chiefs really do not like to give big contracts to guys that are 29 years or older, no matter how good. We've seen that with player after player. And I haven't gone back and checked when the franchise started doing that, or when Andy Reid started doing that, if that was even back during his Philadelphia days. I haven't gone back and looked. But at some point, the Chiefs and Andy Reid and Brett Veach have pretty much decided we really do not want to give large contracts to guys who are 29 years or older. And, you know, at first it's easy to say, well, that's just a nerdy analytics, position. And there's nothing wrong with the nerdy analytics position. I often take those, but it's really got a practical side to it. It's amazing how startling the numbers are for NFL players once they hit 29 years old, and it goes even for the great ones. And I know Tom Brady has kind of changed our ability to think about that, but once you get past a handful of quarterbacks and a handful of guys who are just extraordinarily healthy across the board, players who aren't particularly good, special teamers, or players who have Hall of Fame waiting on them, that age of 29 holds up pretty strong, where you start to see a dip in production, in their availability. They're just not healthy. Their ability to recover from an injury and look as good after as they did before. The numbers are startling right there at that age of 29. It really seems to hit right there. It doesn't get any better at the age of 30 or 31, of course. So you've got Chris Jones sitting here, and I don't remember how deep into his 29th year he is, but he's sitting here at 29 years old, and the Chiefs don't like to give out big contracts to those players. And so that's one thing that really stands out here as to why they might be balking. Now, the second thing is, well, how much money is he asking for? And again, consensus seems to be that, well, he wants Aaron Donald money, and maybe the Chiefs are looking to give him Quinnen Williams kind of money. So really quick, I've got their contracts pulled up here on SpotTrack. SpotTrack's a great website. There are others. They're great websites too. This is what I've got pulled up tonight. So the Quinnen Williams contract that he just did sign, he's a fantastic defensive tackle. He's younger by a little bit, I think 3 seasons. Quinnen Williams is in the neighborhood of about, I think it's 4 years, and it's $96 million, which I guess puts him around $25 million per season, if I'm looking at that right. It's about where that, and that doesn't really been hit this year. It really hits 2024 and the next 4 seasons. So somewhere around, I think if I'm doing my math right, maybe it's $24 million is what he's coming in at. About half of that is guaranteed. And then once you start getting in the area of what they call practical guarantees, really he's looking at about 3/4 of that guaranteed, which basically means the first 3 years are guaranteed. And then you roll over and look at the Aaron Donald contract, and I pull that up. It was a 3-year deal. It was also worth $95 million, which is about what the Quinnen Williams contract was worth, but it's 3 years. So at the end of the day, he really pulls up over here with an AAV, I'm trying to find it here, of just over $30 million a year. So I figure, and I don't know, but I figure that Chris Jones is probably asking for about a 4-year deal at about $30 million a season, which is about 120 total, and he probably wants about 3/4 of that guaranteed, which would basically be 3 of the 4 years guaranteed, is about what they're looking at. So if you're the Chiefs here, if we stay on the age thing for a second, you're doing some calculus, and you're like, well, we're okay with that this season at the age of 29, and maybe next season at the age of 30. But we really don't want to be committed to that following season when Chris Jones is 31. That's the season I figure that the Chiefs really don't want to be boxed in on. They don't really want to be attached to a $30 million cap hit, and I think that's probably where it's coming in at. So my guess is, and again, I don't know for sure, but my guess is that the Chiefs are probably offering like a 3-year deal that would be somewhere around $85 million on the whole, and it would probably be somewhere around, again, 2/3 of that guaranteed, which would be like 2 of the seasons guaranteed. And again, I don't know that, but that's probably where we're looking. So not only do you have the age thing kicking in here, but you also have to wonder, well, at what point, and I apologize if my AirPods went out there for a second, you might have missed something, but I don't think it'll be anything significant. But you have to ask yourself, at what point, if you're the Chiefs, are you willing to pay Chris Jones a ton of money and then also risk the age and injury thing? Because he's already in the 29 bracket, which is where the numbers start to fall off. So it's a very practical consideration here for the Kansas City Chiefs. And that just kind of rolls right into the next thing. And again, you have a salary cap in the NFL. It's really not a hard cap. There are ways to get around it, manipulate it to some degree over the course of 3 to 4 seasons. But really, when you look at it, you still have that cap to deal with. So you have Patrick Mahomes, and I'm going to pull up his contract here as well. Patrick Mahomes, he renegotiated his contract this year, and even so, still, after the renegotiations, his cap hit for this season is a solid $40 million. I mean, $40 million. And listen, it's easy to sit here and say, well, it's Patrick Mahomes. He's worth anything he wants. And, you know, to some degree that's true. But when you're trying to build a Super Bowl winner, there are limits. And so Patrick Mahomes is sitting here at $40 million cap hit this year. It goes up to 47 next year, 49 the year after, back down to 44. So you've already got a quarterback here that's making 44 or 45 million. And then if you were to add Chris Jones to that, let's call it $28 million, even 30, you're somewhere between $70, $75 million for just 2 players. And you say, well, it's the MVP of the defense, the MVP of the offense, they're worth it. And, you know, to some degree that is true. But you're trying to win Super Bowls if you're Kansas City. You're not just trying, and I'm not knocking franchises who do this, you're not just trying to go, 12 wins a season, get a win in the playoffs, go home and celebrate, and enjoy the offseason. That's not the goal if you're Kansas City. And so they've got to keep that in mind too, that you've got 2 players that potentially you package them together. They could be sitting around $75 million of the cap in most seasons. A cap, but by the way, is going to be sitting around 220, 230 over the next 2 to 3 seasons too. It's not going to have the super big jump like some people have tried to suggest. So when you look at that $75 million, it's like, well, you've still got a whole bunch of money to spend on the other players, but it goes so quick. When you actually sit down and do the math and you see where your money is going, it just goes away so quick if you're going to have a real Super Bowl competitive team. And that kind of rolls into the next point, and that is there's only been one team over the past 20, 25 years who has consistently been up there for Super Bowl wins, and that's been the Patriots. And I know people are talking about the Steelers and the Saints and the Ravens and some of the Colts even. But those teams didn't have a whole lot of Super Bowl success. They had great regular seasons, and they fizzled out in the playoffs, and we've only seen the Patriots continue over the past 25 years. They're not doing it now anymore, now that Brady is gone. But only the Patriots continue to be right up there, actually in the Super Bowl and winning Super Bowls year in and year out. All the other teams, even the Steelers and the Saints and the Ravens and the Packers, the whoever's you want to put in there, all the rest of them would put up gaudy regular season numbers and not show back up in the Super Bowl. So if you're the Chiefs, you're sitting here, you're like, well, what pattern would we like to follow? Well, we'd like to follow the pattern that the Patriots have used all these years, because they're the one team that kept showing up in the Super Bowl. And, well, what pattern was that the Patriots were using? Well, great coach in Belichick, great quarterback with Brady, and they kept the roster very trim. They really did. They did not throw a lot of money to try to keep the band together. It was very normal every year for them to trade a vet, and it was very normal for them to just let a guy walk. Those were not unusual moves, and that's how they kept winning Super Bowls. And you might say, well, there's other ways to do it. I don't doubt that, but the Chiefs are having to make that choice right now with these players, just like with Tyreek Hill last offseason. So the Chiefs have a Hall of Fame coach in Andy Reid. They've got basically a Hall of Fame quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. I think that's very comparable to the Brady-Belichick combination. The only question is, are you going to follow the model that all the other teams used, which was, hey, let's throw lots of money to keep our top 8 to 10 players here, or let's follow the Patriots model in which we keep the rest of that roster trim, that we don't get emotionally attached to a left tackle or to a defensive back or to a wide receiver or to whoever, because we already know we've got that coach-quarterback combination, which gives us an advantage almost every week, an advantage that other teams have to overcome. And, maybe they can. Sometimes they can. But that gives us an advantage every week because, the coach is going to be healthy and the quarterback's usually going to be healthy. So that gives you an advantage in almost every single game that you enter. And then it's up to you to kind of patch the holes, patch the rest of the roster. And now most of the other teams have not tried it that way. Most of the other teams have really, really tried. Once they've drafted well, they've got a good offensive line, or they've got a good secondary, they've got a good something, they've really tried their best to keep throwing money at those top-end players. And what that does, it starts to affect your depth, and it starts to affect the quality of the starters of the rest of the roster. So the Chiefs are having to make those choices. I don't think there's a wrong decision here. I do think, though, that there's a very strong case to be made for the Chiefs considering trading Chris Jones. And I know that seems like blasphemy. And listen, I'm not undervaluing Chris Jones. I love Chris Jones. He is a fantastic player. And if they want to pay him, anybody that wants to pay him, there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally fine. But there is another side to be considered here, and it is very much worth the Chiefs keeping all of their options open. And, as good as Chris Jones is, at some point there will be life after Chris Jones for the Kansas City Chiefs, whether that's now or 2 or 3 seasons from now. And listen, I know that some people are saying that, well, they built the defense around Chris Jones. Well, the defense kind of worked itself around Chris Jones. They have tried very hard. They really have, to draft defensive tackles, to draft edge rushers, and really none of them have worked out. I mean, the free agent signings, I'm well aware of all the players that they've signed over the past 5 seasons, players they've drafted, and by and large, it has not worked out. I'm not trying to take a stab here at the front office, because if I were an NFL general manager, I would have blind spots and I would have certain things that I would be weaker at as well. We all do. The Chiefs have done much better at drafting and developing linebacker, much better at drafting and developing, especially developing defensive backs. They have done a tremendous job of that time after time. They have really, really struggled to do anything else here at defensive line. And it's not so much that they've just built the defense around Chris Jones. It's that, well, we are really struggling to get anybody besides Chris Jones to get to the quarterback. And you could even take that and make that, you could even take that and turn that into a very strong argument as to why they should give Chris Jones whatever he wants. You could very much make the case for that. But at some point, life without Chris Jones has to happen, whether it's now or 3 seasons from now. And if you can do it now, if you can trade him now, you should be able to get a couple of pretty good draft picks. I don't think it would be 4 or 5 good draft picks, but I would think you could probably get a couple of very good draft picks, which you could then use to start to build the roster, not build the roster, but continue to develop the roster and kind of refresh it and replenish it every season. They did it last off season. They'll have to keep doing it. This is not a process that stops. This is not something that you get put in place and you don't have to worry about it. It's something you have to do every single off season, especially when Mahomes is making this kind of money, which leads me into another conversation very quickly. Mahomes, when he signed the deal, I forget, 2 or 3 seasons ago now, probably 2 seasons ago, there were people who were saying then that, well, it kind of was a good deal for the Chiefs. And certainly now, once we're seeing all the other quarterbacks continue to make their big money, there are people out there who would suggest, well, Patrick Mahomes is now underpaid. And the quarterback market is a vicious cycle right now for the high-end quarterbacks. It's almost kind of silly season is what it really gets down to. But for now, that's what everybody has to deal with. So if you're the Chiefs, you're looking here and you're thinking, well, here in a season or 2, Mahomes may want an increase in his money too. If we got all these other quarterbacks making 35 and 40, well, why should Mahomes be sitting here at 45? Maybe Mahomes should be at 50 and 55. It's almost like chasing your own tail is what happens here. Ridiculous or not, it's a fact of life. And so Kansas City is still looking at that as well. So listen, anybody that wants to bring Chris Jones back at, say, 4 years and maybe 28 a season, I'm okay with it, totally understand. But also anybody, and I haven't heard many, but anybody who thinks, hey, we trade Chris Jones now and maybe we don't win the Super Bowl this year. Maybe we're just a playoff team, but we're much better set up for the next 3 seasons. I'm totally okay with that as well. I think there's a great case to be made for that. All right, as always, there's more that I could say, but I think I've jabbered enough. I appreciate everybody watching again. The 2 podcasts I'm on are called the Odds On Favorite. You can get them on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast, and then the Stat Sheet podcast. They're both basically NFL podcasts. We cover all kinds of different things, and look forward to seeing you over there as well. Thank you for listening. Good to see everybody again. We'll try to do this a little bit more often. Hope you have a great one. Goodbye.